Okay, so first I want to thank the organizers for inviting me, Angelica and Aaron. And I will talk again about Jerusalem and Philistia, especially during the Iron Age. And I will show maybe some things that Felix also talked might reoccur. But I will actually also talk about other issues as well. So, of course, we're talking about the Philistines. Likely are some groups of immigrants or other types of group coming from the West, various locations in the West. And that's basically the Philistines. And we know them from the Bible very well, from especially Judges and Samuel. And there are lots of stories about the conflicts between Israelites and the Philistines. It's a very big topic in these biblical books. And on the other hand, we have some evidences on contacts and some connections, both biblical and and also archaeological. So this is, of course, interesting situation, and I will try to say about this a bit. As I said, the Philistines are coming from the West. They are like an alien group. They also have a different material culture, and and they are based in these 5 Philistine cities, and maybe generally the region of the southern coastal plains. We all know that. And a few words about the Bible. I'm not a Bible person really, but I will. It's interesting that we have a lot of references to the conflicts between the Israelites and the Philistines. We have several stories. We have the stories of the capture of the Ark by the Philistines, and they put it at Ashdod and then at Ekron, a whole big, rather long story. And then we have the Samson cycle, which relates to the battles with the Philistines. It's also quite a long story. And then we have David and Goliath, and we have also Saul getting killed in the battle with the Philistines at Beth Shean. So we have a lot of stories. It's a big volume of literature in the biblical narrative, so it's very maybe this is why one of the reasons that we are doing all these conferences, because of these biblical references. It's quite prominent. So we have these stories, but there are some scholars that for a long time follow this narrative and actually said that really the Philistines controlled much of the country in this period, maybe in the early Iron Age, Iron One, and they have controlled much of the country, especially Knauf and then other researchers, and they are talking about that there is a control and influence of the Philistines on the Judean culture, on the hill land, and they go from all kinds of basically, they follow the biblical narrative of the strengths of the Philistines. There's some talk of all kinds of important biblical words coming from the Aegean etymology, like Dvir, Pilegesh, and there are talks about that. There is a suggestion that there were Philistine garrisons in several sites, and also they mentioned some of the archaeological data, like the Philistine Bicom were in some of the sites on the hills, and but really we don't have other than this narrative a really strong evidence of a real control, or like a capture, or like a territorial control of a Philistine on the Judea, on the hill lands, especially as probably the Philistines in this period, in the early Iron Age, were more like an immigrant society. So how come they are already conquering more lands? I mean, this seems a bit less logical. So I would not go this way. But on the other hand, we have different passages in the Bible, in the Old Testament, that show a different picture of the maybe some relationships between the Israelites or Judah and the Philistines. We have especially relating to the story of David, which actually is the king which eventually finishes the Philistine problem for the Israelites. Israelites, but still we have a lot of stories, several stories that are related to that, and especially the one where he takes refuge in Philistine Gat with Achish, the king Achish, and then he's given the territory of Ziklag, and eventually he also seems to somehow be involved in the campaign of the Philistines and against the Israelites. Somehow, in some way, he comes, and then he eventually the Philistine captain, the commanders, they don't want him there, but he comes there. So some kind of involvement with the Philistine. It's not a situation of total separation. There are some relationship if you go according to some of the narratives in the Bible. And we have also later this units of David, the Palti, the Karti and Palti, which was suggested that maybe they are relating to some populations, Philistines or something from the west, possibly, and they are part of David's heroes. So some kind of maybe mercenaries that he's using. This is from the text, it seems like that. And the question, what is their origin? There are some kind of a foreign origin. And because of the name, this could be something relating to maybe to the Philistine, Crete, Cartes, all these etymologies. Possibly it's related. So, and we saw like that David was maybe like in the Philistine army, and then the Philistines are in David's army, so seems to be some connection here in the military world of David, maybe especially around this, the relationships with the Philistines are somehow mentioned in the Bible. So we have this background. So this is the background. So basically, what is the archaeological evidence? This is what I will try to show, the archaeological evidence of these contacts, relationships between Judah and or Jerusalem and the West and Philistia. And first, we know that the Philistine material culture has several elements which are specific for it. There are alien elements. Some elements are really coming from or affiliated with the West, with Greece or Cyprus, something like that. We have several different elements. We have the cooking traditions, cooking vessels, diet, consumption of pigs is a very distinct thing that really differs the Philistines from other peoples in the region. We have certain architectural features. We have the decorated Philistine pottery, which is the most common thing archaeologically, and we have also some terracottas, figurines, female and bovine figurines, and we also have loom weights. We have maybe other stuff as well. We have a whole group of components of material culture. I will not elaborate about this, and especially I will just talk a bit about the pottery, because this is where we see more influence in the archaeological data, I think, so far. And we have the decorated Philistine pottery. This is very common in the Philistine cities, and it is rare outside. And we have several types of Philistine pottery. We have the earlier stage, the Philistine one or the Philistine monochrome, appears only in the 12th century, or the early Iron Age one, and we have the Philistine bichrome, which appears later, and we have the the Philistine, the degenerated Philistine, the red slip Philistine, and the late Philistine ware, which appear in the Iron Age 2A, the beginning of the Iron Age 2. So we have several stages, and this is important because we have different distribution of this ware, because in the earliest ware we have this monochrome of Philistine one pottery appears really so far only in the Philistine towns, main towns. It does not appear elsewhere so far. But then the Philistine bichrome, the next stage, which is not very long afterwards, appears in several other sites, especially in sites in the region of Philistia, in the southern coastal plains, but also in other sites, like in the northern valleys and in the hill country as well, in the central hills or in the region of Judah. This is which I will focus on, because we have several occurrences, especially at Tel Nasbe. And then we have later on, a few centuries later, in the 10th, 9th, 8th century, we have the late Philistine ware, which, as you have seen, appears also to a certain extent also in some Judean sites, which I'll also talk a bit about that. So I will start with the earlier period, with the earlier Iron Age, with the bichrome pottery, which looks like that. This is the pottery with two colors of decoration, black and red. And there it's usually it's white slipped with a very chalky white slip. And this pottery actually appears in several other non-Philistine sites, not only in the main Philistine sites. And examples are both as you will see in Judah, in several sites in Judah, and also in the north, several sites in like Megiddo, other sites at northern valleys. So it has a bigger distribution. And especially, I will talk about the site of Tel Nasbe. This is a site which is north of Jerusalem. Today it's in the city of Ramallah. And it is a classical fortified site of the Iron II with this casemate wall. And so this is an excavation almost 100 years old. It's a bit problematic. A lot of contexts were not clear. But from the excavation from the 1930s, we have a relatively large assemblage of Philistine bichrome pottery found in the site. And the interesting thing, this was analyzed by chemical analysis and also petrography. And there's quite interesting results about this pottery. And here... So this pottery, this shows a bit, this was well known that they found Philistine pottery in the Tel Nasba, and in the about 30 years ago, there was an initial study, Newton activation study of chemical analysis of 16 Philistine sherds, bichrome sherds, from Tel Nasba. And this was done mainly by Jan Gunoweg and several others, and they published this, and they have very interesting results, because 5 of these 16 vessels, 5 were made of mozza clay, or chemical profile similar to mozza clay, or similar to one that is known from the Central Hills or Jerusalem, this region of the Central Hills. 5 of these examples, 4 were matching Ashdod profile, so they were coming from the coast, from Philistia, imported, and there are 7 others which are not clear. I mean, they didn't have a good match for them. So this is a very interesting result, because we have, not only that we have Philistine bichrome sherds of this is very Philistine type pottery outside of Philistia, quite inside the Judean or the Israeli territory, but it is produced there also, which is very surprising. It was not. It seemed like a bit crazy. I mean, when I talked to Trude Dotan about this, he said, "Oh, this is rubbish." You know, she wouldn't like this study too much, so this is interesting. So I went and did a bit more study. I thought, okay, this is interesting. First I thought, okay, I will do some analysis of Nasbe, but the Philistine bichrome was already studied, so no news. But eventually I understood this is important, because it's really interesting, because there is an advance, there is using more techniques will maybe enable us to really understand this phenomena of having this Philistine pottery outside of Philistia with this various sources. So I took a bit more analysis of these pottery from Tel Nasbe, and did some petrographic analysis just recently on this. This is the Philistine pottery. You see this with the red and black decoration, typical types. I mean, these are sherds which are typical, and you find them in Philistia. They will look Philistine. They don't look different than the ones, I mean, topologically or decoration-wise, they look the same. So really, they look really the same. And so I did some more petrographic analysis on this pottery. Actually, this is the first time I've shown this, published yet. So this is preliminary results of, I took 21 Philistine bichrome vessels and did some petrography on them. And then you get basically I get again the result of having a lot of them made locally, made in the region of the hill country, not in Philistia. So we have multiple sources. We have several sources. We have one source is the local source. One source is the Philistine local. Okay, they come from Philistia. That doesn't surprise us. But then we have a third source, maybe the central coast, somewhere there. I'm not showing any petrographic slides now. I hope it's okay. I'm just having the results here. So this is really interesting, I think, because we have the third source also. This didn't work out well because the labels did not work. But this is the one is the Mozza clay. There is a Terra Rossa clay, which is local to the hill countries, and then there is the less clay, which is typical of the Philistia, and then we have a Hamra clay. Hamra clay occurs mostly in the central coast, north of Tel Aviv, south of Dor, more or less, somewhere like there. So we have another central coast source, and then we have occasional of several that not clear also. So we have several sources. We have three sources at least more or less identified. This is by the way the advantage of petrography over chemical analysis, because in chemical analysis if you don't have a match from a reference group you cannot say anything. But in petrography, sometimes you can say a general region, even if you're not sure and you don't have a good match, you can say a general region still. So this is an advantage of this method, which maybe some of the previous study, which was ungrouped, or I mean unmatched, were maybe the source of the central coast. So this is an interesting result, I think. We have, as I said, we have some Philistine bichrome is imported, some seems to be locally produced in Judah, and some comes from another place. So this is interesting because it shows first that we have a deeper connection. It's not like only trade or a movement of several vessels. We have a deeper connection. We have some cultural influence between Philistia and this this region of Judah or the Israelite region. Also maybe it shows some movement of people. This is also I think possible. We cannot overrule that. I think this is especially possible because we have this third source, because we have like this pottery coming from all over the place and then concentrated in one place, and we have this same picture also in the north. So it's interesting, I think. So maybe we have like some groups of people moving around, and that's why we have this pottery appearing in some places also. Maybe this is a possibility. Of course, it could be just like a matter of fashion, or some that people in the hills also produce this pottery. But like you see, this factory of sake, I mean, in California, it's not a coincidence. Maybe that's there, not in somewhere else. That's a question. Okay, so this is the iron one in what we have for the Philistine pottery. And then, as I said, there is another study just recently published by Mario Martin about the Philistine bichrome pottery, the same type of pottery appearing in the north. We have in the north here Megiddo, Jezreel Valley, all kinds of sites in the northern valleys. And he studied quite a big, tried to study really everything that was found, every Philistine bichrome sherd found in this region during the earlier Iron Age. And this is the pottery, a lot of it from Megiddo, but also from other sites. And you can see this is already the results. And you have all kinds of results, also variable sources of this pottery found in the north of Israel. So his results also show that a lot of it is really exported from Philistia, okay, from its origin, but some of it is locally produced in the northern region, some of it is made in the central hills, and some of it is made in the central coastal plains. So it's interesting result. Also, these multiple sources of this pottery. It's not only the two, the receiver and the sender, but also another source, which is interesting results, I think. And it's quite similar to the ones from Nasbe, because we have these, at least the three groups of Philistia, Judah, the hill plains, and the central coast, bearing also in this study as well. So it's interesting resemblance between the two studies. So I think it's some kind of phenomenon there happening. So then I will, this is the Aaron 1. Now about the Aaron 2, we saw this already, this slide about the late Philistine, or the Ashdod, where we're appearing in Judah. And this is a recent study of Cohen Weinberger and Al. There is a nice joke about two rabbis about this, but I will not say it about, because I'm now repeating what is already said. So, but I'll make it quick. So this is there's quite a few shirts from this late Philistine wear from the city of David, and this was published by Cohen Weinberger and others, and Joe and Nachshon, and they analyzed this by petrography, and also saw that some of it was imported from Philistia, some was made locally in the hill country. Also, they say some cooking pots were also imported from Philistia, which is interesting. And by the way, saying what is more expensive, decorated pottery or cooking pot, I think a cooking pot is more expensive than a decorated shirt. The decorated vessel, I think, would make sense. Because, okay, you have a cup like this. If it's decorated, is it more expensive or not? It wouldn't be more expensive. But the cooking pot, if it's a better quality, maybe it's more expensive. That's just a thought. So we have this late Philistine ware from Philistia, and they found several, the local source and the imported source, and also we have the additional 29 the late Philistine, which I analyzed from city of David and the Ophel and the Jewish quarter, and also they have these sources, you've seen that already, of several are made locally, several are imported. So we have this situation of locally made, maybe Philistine style pottery, which shows some relationship, some influence, cultural influence at least, happening between the regions. We have them also in other sites, like at Tel Motza. We have them at Khirbet Kayafa also, and the ones that sampled here were actually from Philistia, and the ones sampled here were locally made. So there are various sources as well in these sites, which was considered Judean sites. So, and another interesting thing, which this already was shown here, that within, if you look at the pottery from Jerusalem during the Iron Age, we see that very few are, very small percentage is imported. Only a very small percentage is imported. And there is not a lot of connections, according to the pottery, at least with lots of regions, like the Phoenicia, the north, even the Samaria, Beersheba, these regions. There are hardly any region, and only one of the main region that has some connections, according to the pottery, is this region of Philistia, and the Shfela, the coast. The southern coast, which is interesting on the background of this very detached character of Jerusalem, according at least to the pottery. And this is both, you can see it by topological evidence looking at the pottery, but also after the analysis, the composition analysis, this is reinforced. And then this highlights really even more the importance of this connection with the Philistines. So eventually, okay, so we found 20 shirts, 30 shirts is not a lot. But if you look at other regions, if you look how many Phoenicians, vessels, and so on, there's much less. So comparatively, it's more than other regions. But we have to know that other things are still imported. It's not like they are totally detached. So from the pottery point of view, we have a relatively strong connection with Philistia during this Iron Age 2, mainly the Iron Age 2A, up to the 8th century. Then we have a decline, decrease. Maybe it's related to this decline of the Shfela because of the Assyrian campaigns. Possibly it's an economic issue. Not much is talked about the other side. How much do you find a Judean or Israelite or things from the west, from the east actually, in Philistia, in the west, because we have two sides of each of this connection. So actually there is not so much, I think, about the question how you define it is also a question because it's not so visible in a way, because we don't have this decorated pottery to look for. But we have, if you look at the analysis of the composition, we have some pottery at Gat. I did some analysis. I did quite a bit on Philistine sites, and not much comes from the hill country clearly. So we don't have much. We have just a few. There's one jar from Pythos from Ekron, one jar from Gat, and then we have later, during the 8th Iron 2b, we have more, which makes sense because Gat becomes maybe a Judean site, so it's not surprising to have more. And when we have this evidence in the late Iron Age of this wheat coming from the hilllands to Ashkelon, so we have some connection, but actually it's I would say it's looking less than the other way around. Another connection, which also but goes from the west to the east, is possibly, it's a question mark, whether this relates to the type of cooking ware which is used in the late Iron Age. We have the cooking jugs. This is a typical Philistine cooking pot, cooking vessel of the early Iron Age, which continues into the late Iron Age. It is small and has one handle. It doesn't have a base, so it's a specific, or it can have a base or not. I mean, but it's not similar to the old tradition of the local cooking pots. And then we have in Judea, in the late Iron Age, the Judean type cooking pot. It's not the same, but it has some similarities. It's small size. It has some similarities. Some say maybe it is some influence of this cooking tradition in small pots, going from the west to the east. It's a possibility we have to look also for. Okay, another topic I will just shortly talk about is the issue of figurines. Terracotta is also mentioned before, and I will also talk a little bit about that. And then this is also a class of objects which shows some relationships between Jerusalem or the Judea and the West. And we have this figurine which was mentioned. It's Ashdod type head that was found in the city of David, which is also a typical Philistine style type figurine. And we have also this type, which is possibly also a kind of an Ashdod, a seated model, a model of a seat we have, or a bed. It's a question how you define it. You can argue if this is a Philistine style terracotta, but it's also decorated in the Philistine of black and red, and had this white slip. So maybe it is related. Generally, we have this type of model of a chair, of a bed, which may be related also to this seated Philistine figurines, and we have them. Okay, a few from the city of David, and then we have a group also from Tel Nasbe, and. These are also might be evidence of some relations, and we also have this possible lion head cup, which was maybe made in Philistia, derived from Philistia. We have another vessels coming with a source from the Philistia also. So we have a few from the cult vessel, either in style or in source. So it doesn't make what it is, but it's a type of terracotta brought from Philistia. So we have this also, and in the style aspect, we also have these figurines from Moza and from Caiapha, which seem to show the Philistines' style of this, at least this flat head and the big nose, and they are similar generally, and they kind of resemble, the first thing you say, they resemble more the style of the Philistines terracotta than the Phoenician or Judean or Canaanite. So there is some, it's not the same, but there seems to be some influence maybe here as well. And it's interesting, these are really from the hardcore of Judah. I mean, Caiapha, which has no, the only iconographic object from Kayafa is this figurine. So the rest is not, is kosher. Yeah, so this is Mozart from the temple and so on, and this is like example from Felicia, which shows the different similar details. Style, maybe it's the influence of style, maybe it's not the same god or something. That's a question, what does it mean? Of course, you can have a lot of speculation. And on the other hand also, this is interesting because we have the other side as well. We have the Judean figurines. We really have Judean figurines in the late Iron Age. We have the pillar figurines and we have the horse figurines, which really are Judean, I think. And how many of these do you find in Felicia? And it's interesting also because this is the other side of the equation. We have just a few, like in the pottery. I think it seems you have less relatively, especially since Felicia is anyway, it's a region of a lot of contacts. People come from all over the place. So it's we have some, but it's not really quite. We have a few, but not so many. Here's one example from Gat, one example from Tel Jeme of this Judean, maybe Judean type pillar figurine from the Iron Age too. Okay, so this is a summary of what we have, what we don't have. We can have things moving. The vessels can be moved, and also the ideas can move. So, like if we have a Philistine-style vessel found in Judah, but it is made in Philistia, so the vessel moved. But if it was made in Judah, so the idea moved. So we have movement of both ideas and objects from Philistia to Judah or to Jerusalem, Judah, the Israelite region. So we have movements quite a bit, I think, relatively. So there are connections, I think, clearly. And so if we summarize, we've seen the bichrome pottery, especially at Tel Nasba. There are a few other sites, but the big quantities there. We have the late Philistine in several sites, maybe the cooking jugs, some of figurines, and but still it's kind of sticks out, especially on the background of this relatively detached character of the Jerusalem, or especially in Jerusalem, material culture, which is quite detached, doesn't has many imports from other areas, so it's kind of stands out. So what does it mean? Is it trade relations, cultural contacts, movement of people? Maybe the Philistines conquered Jerusalem and so on. We have lots of options. Of course, this is a lot of speculation. And really, I think it's not only trade, I think, because we have movement of ideas as well. So I think it's not only trade. There is some cultural influences, maybe movement of potters, maybe movement of individual. We have seen a similar situation in the north, according to the Philistine bichrome pottery, also maybe movement of ideas, and notably we don't have like the pig consumption as well joining this influence. So rather than reflecting Philistine control of Judah during the Iron Age, I think there is evidence of trade, some political connections, maybe some cultural connections. Maybe I think also mobility of groups of people within this region in various periods. I think this is also a possibility which we might want to check, which influence this connection. Okay, thank you.